Thank you so much for coming in today. My name is Zoe Carr and I'm the Lived Experience Project Officer for Finding North Network. And today we have one of our network members, Richard McLaren, with us, and we're going to have a conversation about mental health and photography. Now, before we begin, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the lands that I'm on today. I'm on Yagara and I'm on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people today, and I pay my respects to the First Nations people around Australia. And I'd also like to acknowledge the people with living and lived experience, their families and their carers and friends, and the amazing work that everyone is doing in this current landscape. So thank you so much. And just a bit of etiquette, if you're joining us on Zoom today, please turn your video off as we are recording this session. Me and Richard will be having a bit of a conversation, and at the end of it, we'll stop recording and we'll give everyone an opportunity to ask questions as well. Also, you can use the chat and I can ask the questions to Richard directly for you. As always, when we have these conversations, sometimes we will be talking about some distressed and a bit of challenging moments as well. So please make sure that you look after yourself, and the numbers are available should you wish to contact anyone. Otherwise, I'm also online and will be supporting this today as well. Also, during our conversations with Richard, I think we always need to remember that when we're having these conversations that we need to be courageous. And one of the things that we always talk about is that we should be present, maintain confidentiality, listen with the intent to learn, and also suspend judgment. As always, the Finding North Network members are amazing, and we always have amazing conversations. So this is, I would say, a very good and safe enough environment for us to have this conversation today. So I'll stop talking here and I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'd really like to invite Richard to just say hi.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
I'm sure everybody is great. Richard, I guess, you know, we've had many conversations over the last year of knowing each other. And I guess today is just a conversation that we've probably have had a couple of times. But I guess my first question for you today is, tell us about your story and how did you get here?
It's a long story. I turned 76. I turned 76 in a month's time, so it has been a long journey. Probably the beginning of the mental health side was my tour of duty in Vietnam back in 1969-70 in the Air Force. As much as I actually volunteered to go there, I was probably only up there 3 months and realised that it wasn't our fight. We shouldn't have been there. And but I survived the tour, came back and was totally dismayed and by the reception that a lot of us got when we came back. I'm a fairly caring sort of person, have been all my life, and to be rejected by even your own family members caused me a lot of worries. I staggered through life, 3 marriages, then until 1995 when I was diagnosed with chronic PTSD. The specialist didn't really know what to do with you. I had some bad experiences with a psychiatrist, psychologists. I went through many different courses for PTSD sufferers, mainly from the forces. But while I was doing that, I was actually doing my own research to try and work out what I could do and having a psychiatrist say, go home, vegetate and die because we don't know what to do with you. I went home and said, I'm not going to die. I want to keep living, of course.
Richard, I just wanted to ask it just because you touched on something, and I think there's a really there's a question in there that I want to ask is, you've mentioned that you've been, prepared to go to Vietnam, and many times you've shared that is the reception of you coming back that has really challenged your life and that that journey of your life. Can you tell me a little bit more?
Well, I actually argued with DVA about the cause of my PTSD. At that stage, I didn't know a lot about it either, but they said that it was due to my service in Vietnam, my tour up there. Things we see, the things we did, and all those types of things. Vietnam veterans did not have a very good reputation due to newspaper and television coverage. And you come back thinking that you're going to be welcomed back and everybody be pleased that you've survived and all that, only to be kicked out of your own RSL club in your hometown. People that you've known all your life didn't want you in the club. Siblings that would be telling people that I didn't want to talk about it, when inside I'm screaming to tell people about it. And then the isolation or the ostracization of me. It was very difficult. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much for just sharing that with me. I think, from my conversations with you, it's always so hard and so challenging to think about your experience, because, as you said, and my experience with you is when you are a warm, gentle, caring human being, and you came back you came home, and getting that reception must have been shock, whilst you're still processing your challenges and your experience over there. But enough about the challenges, because we've got a lot of beautiful things ahead that I know from your story. So let's get straight into photography. Some doctors and made those comments about you, yet you were so strong, and yet you had that fire in you to say, I don't want to die and I'm not going to. And you've went on this journey of research. And what did you try before photography? And how did you set your mind into photography?
Well, to start off with, when I left the Air Force, I had 16 jobs in 10 years. Because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and that was part of the PTSD working in me, saying I don't know what my role is in life. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. Tried many things, and marriages, of course, but I always had a camera with me. One of my first photos was taken when I was 5, and it was published in the local paper. That was off an old box Brownie.
Who gave you that first camera?
That was my first camera.
You bought it yourself?
It was my father's. And Dad was a very avid amateur photographer. And he worked a lot with colour slides back in those days, even though he did some black and white that we processed at home. And I was always beside him when he was taking photos and all that type of stuff. He'd never let me have his cameras, his good ones. But I was always asking questions and all that type of stuff. And just two things that have always stuck in my mind were, he said to me one day, he said, there is a photograph in every day, that tells a story. And he said, and everything has some beauty to it. There is beauty in everything. And he said, you've just got to look for it. So I carried the camera through Vietnam, and looking back on it, I've got so many photos of local scenery, local people, village life. I went out on a day off just to have a trip around Vung Tau and ran across a wedding, and they didn't have a photographer, so I stayed with them and photographed their wedding for them. This is in the middle of the conflict, but that's the way it was. So when I came back, I dabbled in photojournalism. I used to have stuff published in a magazine called Australasian Post. It was a weekly magazine. I did stories on unusual collections, that type of thing. Stories for the local newspaper, with photos, of course. But when I was diagnosed, I left the camera alone for a while. And it probably took 5 years after I was diagnosed to actually do something with the camera. And I realized that it actually got me out of the house. I was not one to go anywhere. I hated meeting up with people. I'd only get halfway through a supermarket and I'd have to run out because it was of my anxiety. I wouldn't answer the door. I wouldn't answer the phone. During that period, I actually tried suicide. But then I think it was 2004, I had been out taking photos. They were okay, but I wasn't really happy with that. I saw on the computer the Brisbane Writers Festival was coming up, and I'm an avid reader, and I saw that there was a few authors that I have read were coming to the festival. A lot of good overseas ones and as well as Australian ones. And I thought, oh, I'd like to go and photograph them, but I'd like to go and hear their sessions more than anything. And I rang the director of the festival and I said, do you have a photographer there for the festival recording the event? And she said, as a matter of fact, we don't. So I said, I would like to volunteer. And here's me, a person hiding at home, not wanting to go anywhere, volunteering to go out into a crowd of 3,000 and 4,000 people a day. And
wow.
So I did. And I ended up doing three Brisbane festivals and 2 Melbourne festivals. But I realised the camera was something I could hide behind. So my face wasn't showing. It was safe. People were saying how good my photos were, which I was really pleased with, particularly authors. The story I do tell is Colleen McCulloch, who was actually quite ill at the time, but she was there to speak, and I was sitting opposite her waiting for her to go up onto the stage, and a friend of hers told a joke. She rocked back in a chair and gave this mighty hearty laugh, and I snapped her with the mouth open and the head back and all that. And if you know Colleen McCulloch, all her photos have been serious. And I sent her a copy, and she wrote back and said, I want 6 copies, please. Said, I'm going to send them to my friends who reckon I never laugh. So that was the start of it. And I ended up with 3 publishing houses that wanted me to photograph the different festivals, their authors. So it goes on their record. had authors asking me for individual shots they could use for the back of their books.
I love that. I love that.
It was great.
Oh my goodness.
At that particular point, the first one is the one that really changed to bring me to where I am now. There was a young guy by the name of Luke. He was quite a severely disabled person, very tall, and in his words, I'm ugly, I'm scary, and he was non-verbal. Okay, he did a lot of his hand movements and noises. Was his language. He presented some poetry and had his carer read it out, and it was so beautifully descriptive. I'm standing there, took a couple of photos of the speaker, but I'm standing there thinking, wow, I wonder if he could capture that description in photos. And so I went and asked his carer later, I said, does he have a camera? And he said, no, look at his hands, he'd crush one. And I said, I'd really like him to try an experiment. And he said, well, you'll have to talk to his father. And his father was in Disability Services Queensland. I spoke to him. He agreed to let me have Luke loose with a camera. And he also helped me start the first course in an introduction to digital photography. And I began calling it Images of Your Mind, because I believe that a lot of your photos come from within. And
tell me more.
And they come from your mind. You're like an artist. You paint what you see in your head. Okay. That's why painting by numbers, Zoe, is not the right therapy.
I was going to ask. I'm like, yes, what did you mean by the bigger the meat, the bigger the feelings, the bigger the canvas?
That's exactly right.
So for those who don't know, I do paint by numbers as a kind of for me to get out of my head and my focus. And Richard and our fellow network members are like, no, Zoe, you need to get a canvas and paint. And Richard said, the bigger the feelings, the bigger the canvas. And I have yet to get there. I've bought the canvas and I've got all the paint. I will get there. But tell me more, why the bigger the feelings, the bigger the canvas?
It allows you to express with any artist that what you're doing is expressing a feeling that you've got. And if you get a group of artists together and you've asked them all to paint the same thing, this is very true with photography too. If you get a group of people together and say, okay, take a photo of that pier, for instance, you'll get 12 different photos because everybody interprets what they see differently.
That's so true.
That's why an artist can't produce something that they think others want. They're producing what they want, even if they're not conscious of that fact.
Can you say that again? That's really deep, and I want to think about that again.
Again, it's producing, or creativeness comes from your heart or your mind, and it's what you see. We all see things differently. It's a case of all artists say, what would somebody buy? What can I produce that somebody will buy? And you have to tell them that there's nothing you can do that way. You have to paint or do what you want because that's what you feel and that's what you see. and you're making that visualization on the canvas in a photo and so forth. That's why some of my stuff they're accidents. You know, I tripped over in New Zealand in the middle of a lavender field and accidentally hit the shutter button. But I've produced an image of 1 or 2 lavender heads in this massive field with an out of focus mountain behind it, and that looks absolutely great.
Really like that, Richard, because I think a lot of the times, well, at least for me personally, as a recovering people pleaser, I think that made so much sense when you said that, you know, when you're taking a photo, you're not actually pleasing anyone else. You think you are, but unconsciously you're taking the photo or you're painting in the way that you want it. When you press that click, you know, where there is the angle or things like that, you might think that it might be what someone else wants, but ultimately you're still controlling it. And I think for someone who struggles with letting go and control, I think that sounds like a really good healing process.
You can also see it in color. You can also see it in composition, and you can tell who's had a struggle, who's still having a struggle. Past president of a gallery that I worked through hung one of his paintings one day, and I went up to him and I said, "What's the trauma been in your life? You don't show a lot of any of that." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Have you had trauma in your life?" He said, "Yeah, some pretty bad stuff." I said, "It's in your painting."
Wow.
And it was due to the reds and the dark reds, the really black blacks and things like that. Color plays a big part in what you see and how you interpret it.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Same with photography.
Wow. Well, Richard, tell me more about your new organization.
Yes, we
How's that going?
finally got the incorporation papers a week or so ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's called Art From Within.
Arts from Within.
Okay.
I love that.
We wanted art from the heart, but somebody's already got that, unfortunately. It's at this stage a group of 26 artists from Brisbane and Ipswich. We wanted to have some form of cultural activity out here in South Ripley, Greenfield Lakes, Greenbank, right through to the other side to Gatton. It's an area that's not serviced a great deal by any cultural setup. So we organised this art and culture association. The 26 artists, there's a few that have mental health issues and openly talk about it. One of our other members from Finding North, Lisa, she's involved with it. We now have 12 teachers and 1 art therapist, registered art therapist on our books.
That's amazing.
And we don't have a permanent home. We will be roving. We'll go anywhere to talk to people about art and mental health. We are directly aiming at the mental health people, disabilities, Indigenous, youth groups, any of the at-risk groups or the disadvantaged groups around the area. And we will offer them all sorts of art and culture courses. I'll be kicking off with photography, of course, in January.
That's amazing.
And talking to a lot of people out at the expo, the Mental Health Expo a couple of weeks back. They're all very interested in what we can provide. We're also getting involved with the service welfare people from Amberley, because we have a lot of families here, and we just need the activities. We need some place for people to go locally. And I'm also talking to council, of course, keeping in touch with them. I believe they are looking at building a gallery at Ripley, but that's about 4 years away.
Okay.
We're going to do pop-up exhibitions all over the place.
That's amazing. Well, Richard, you let us know when everything, how Finding North Network can support you. There's, we've got a lot of Queensland-based organisations, and, you know that I'm based here as well. So if there's any collateral next time when I come for a coffee, or when everything is set up on the way, let me know, because I'm sure many of our lived experience peers and organisations will be really interested in what you are doing with Art from Within.
Yep. Thank you. That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, then I guess my next question is, how did you start the stories and the question that you sent me, that particular project? Please tell our wonderful network members about it. I'm
attempting to do a photo book on 234 different nationalities that make up Queensland's population, and that comes from the 2016 census. I must check the latest ones, actually. There might be more. And each nationality, I want to interview one person from there and photograph them, of course, and hopefully get a photograph of either traditional dress or a festival relating to that country. I've set up 8 questions, which you answered succinctly. You didn't go into a lot of it.
Did you want me to? Because it says short, because I was like, oh, I didn't know how much to write. Because I could write forever.
An A4 page to fill out.
Okay.
with your answers, but we'll talk about that later. Because there's a couple of questions I've got for you from those answers.
Ask me if this is a good place to ask, and for people to actually have a conversation and know a little bit more about it. What was the question? Tell me, what did you want to ask me?
I'm concerned about your belonging.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think you seem to belong anywhere. You're between two nationalities and all that. That bothers me.
Oh, thank you for that. And that bothers me, to be honest. And I think it's always bothered me. So for those who don't know, I'm Australian born Chinese because I was born over here, but I grew up in Hong Kong, and then I came back over here. And the long story of, Hong Kong not belonging to China back then, one of my mental illness, I guess one of the challenges I've always had is that I'm not white enough, I'm not honky enough, and I'm not Chinese enough. And so through my teenage years, I've just never found any groups that I can belong to without me having to mask, or dissing one or the other. So I've never really been able to embrace one or the other. And in the last year or two, I'm really trying to embrace a new term, or the term that's really used more often now is Asian Australian or Chinese Australian. And what happens? COVID happens, and now I'm too scared to tell people that I'm Chinese Australians without being egged on the street or being threatened, which I've had a few incidents in Sydney as well. So I think, thank you for raising that. And I think within Finding North Network, I'm feeling a lot more settled with that belongingness and trying to find, I guess, a medium and a balance where I can be Chinese, I can be Australian, I can be honky or whatever, Hong Kongese or what people want to call, and just embrace, I'm just a mix of everything, and that is okay. And I guess because of my own personal childhood trauma, I've never had a stable home until the last 7 years. And, you know, so not having a stable home, not having a cultural identity has kind of been the pain of my existence, you can say. So I appreciate your concern, and truth to be told, I think I thought I hit that very well. But then again, I'm talking to you, Richard. Like you said, you can read from painting, so you can hear what it means to me.
Yes, people can't hide it that well. They think they do.
Absolutely, especially for people who have their eyes open and have their ears open and who are genuinely listening.
And it's difficult when you see somebody that is, you know, they're troubled, and you know they're having worries and challenges, but you try to speak to them and they don't really want to hear it. They're sort of, it's in the denial stage.
Absolutely.
But you're Australian. You are welcome here. You were born here, so you're Australian. Okay. Think yourself lucky you got another culture to embrace as well.
Absolutely. On my good days, I love being Chinese and everything like that. I think what, now that we're talking about concerns, I think it's being judged all the time whether or not you're Australian, having the consistent comments, oh, your English is so good. Oh, you look like you have lived experience. Oh, wow, how long have you been here? You know, it's I think it's consistently those micro little things that happen consistently over the years. It's like, why is it that well, actually, I'll divert to another story. I always tell people to close their eyes and say, imagine an Australian. I bet the first person you think about, it's not me. And that's why I always get questioned whether or not I'm Australian, or that because I have my Chinese culture, I can't be both, or that I don't love being an Australian.
The way you pronounce some of your words is your Hong Kong existence.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Asians that I've met who were educated in the States have a similar type language. I call it an international language.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
It's not.
But I haven't learned English anywhere else. I don't think I have a very Aussie accent for some reason, but then there's bits and pieces of me that are so Australian that my partner laughs because he learnt English in Peru, and he's got a very American accent, and so we fight all the time. Simple things like, is it oregano or is it oregano? And he's like, you're a psycho. And we fight over little things like tomato, and I'm like, you're just weird. And is it water or is it water? So, you know, differences everywhere, and I love that we're able to embrace it here. And you know, majority of the time I feel very accepted and loved, and I'm so proud of being an Australian. At the same time, I'm also proud of being Chinese as well. It's just hard when you tell someone that you're Chinese, you automatically get linked to the People's Republic of China and not the culture itself, which I really, really resonate with, is the culture through time, not particularly the country itself, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. But I think you still have part of the Great Wall around you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to crush the whole wall, Richard, but I think I'm taking bits and pieces out. I'm letting loose. I also think that I'm someone who has not only a wall of China or a great wall like that, I have chains and glue and concrete all blocked around me due to my personal trauma. And in the last 2 years working in lived experience, I've been slowly picking it down, putting it back up, or maybe putting something lighter like a fence. And I think that my healing journey was actually not as healed as I thought it was, Richard, to be honest. And I think it's because I spent my days and working in the corporate sector. So I never actually had to think about these stuff aside from working out, working with my psychologists on certain things, to be honest. Hey, this is supposed to be a conversation about you, but anyways, that's the whole point of having a conversation, right? Is where these things will go. But
Me,
anyways,
I'm curious.
yes, and that's why we have these chats. And so yeah, I think that my healing journey was not as far ahead as I personally thought it was. At the same time, I'm so open to it. I'm not saying that I'm not feeling any pain or I'm not going through any challenges. I think everyone has ups and downs. And I think in the last couple of months, I've been very up and down because more than usual because of a lot of things that's going on. But I think it's also the best time for me to learn and be aware of what's next. It's scary though, and sometimes the days aren't very nice.
One thing I would like to mention, because we're talking about lived experience and how I use lived experience has worked so well in the workshops that I give, and it creates that trust between the participant and myself so very quickly when I say that I am suffer from PTSD. They suddenly realize, oh, okay, he's walked my walk. He's walked a mile in my shoes. So he understands. And I don't mean to be derogatory against universities or TAFE or anybody like that, but a lot of their instructors and lecturers and all that type of stuff have not had that trauma.
No, absolutely. And I think that's why I'm personally fighting my internal battle between the biomedical model and versus lived experience. And one of the conversations I've had, Richard, is I feel like my psychologists, my psychiatrists, I thank them so much because I would not be living this life without their support on the medication. And for me to live actually a functional and healthy life, to have the tools for me to be a healthy person, to actually be the mother that I want to be, basically the human that I want to be. But at the same time, like you said, the healing and that vulnerability and the trust that you get when you just say, I've been there too. When Richard, you said, PTSD, I've got complex PTSD, but in a very different experience. But I know exactly what you're talking about when you say you don't go out, because I don't. Or when you go to a shopping center, I need headphones, for example. Just those little things that even though they might understand, the depth of the understanding will never match someone who has felt it. And it's not something you can measure. And I think that's the power of lived experience. And for those who don't know that will be watching this, I'm someone that absolutely hates body contact due to my personal trauma. But when I actually met Richard for a coffee a couple of weeks, I think we hugged maybe 3 times, and one that probably lasts for 15 seconds. And that really made me question, is it touch that I'm scared of? Or is it the lack of trust when someone is touching, like having that actual body contact? And I must say, guys, when I walked away from that hug, I actually was driving and crying because I felt some sort of a release of so much love and warmth. So I think that's, and I think that's what lived experience is, and what it brings out. So thank you so much, Richard, for that hug, and thank you for seeing me.
You're most welcome anytime, anytime.
Thank you. And I think lived experience is such an interesting thing, Richard, because people think that lived experience is a new term. The movement is only getting its head, but it's been alive for so long. Lived experience has been transcended through time, through stories before medical models are out, and it's interesting how science has kind of taken over the world. Facts have taken over the world, that we lost the sense of the lived experience that we all have, our ancestors have, and how that has passed on to what we have now. What are your thoughts on that?
I think and no, you're quite right, but it's, a lot of psychologists now tell you don't live in the past. Get rid of what has caused you concern back then. And I think the lived experience does that. You get to a point where you can say, okay, I've lived that experience. I have sorted it out as much as I can in my head. From here on, it's forward. I take one step forward, I might take 2 steps back, but I'll still keep going forward. And I'm going to attempt to write an article about the little things about PTSD or the mental health side of things that people just don't get. They only understand, oh, you're depressed. No, you have anxiety. You have anger, you have drug addiction, you have alcoholism. They see the main symptoms of what what we had back then. There's so much more to it. There's so many little things that affect us and can possibly trigger us. Things like if you go into a room with people you don't know, one, you've got anxiety to start with, but you can't stand in a group of people and just listen to small talk. Any conversation I have these days, I try to make it as intelligent and as educational as possible. I don't have time for small talk. That it's wasted conversation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I always thought about that, like small talk. I can do it really easily because I force myself, because I couldn't get out of the house and I've got anxiety. I've got social anxiety that I couldn't talk to people. I'm someone that literally cries in uni trying to give a presentation, and that actually wasn't that many years ago. I'd bite my nails till it bleeds, excuse me, guys. And so the only way I knew how to get out of this was to learn new skills and personal development. So I forced myself into hospitality and worked in events management, worked in hotels, worked in bars, so I know how to handle and do these. I can hold conversations like there's no tomorrow, but no one will ever feel my social anxiety. But I absolutely despise small talk. For me, like you said, it's a waste of time. There's no substance in it, and I wonder why substance is such an important thing. Why do you think that, Richard? That is.
We're all sponges for knowledge. I take life as a lifelong education.
That's exactly what I say. And my grandma calls it the societal university. She always says that she can't read, she can't write, but somehow she's managed to bring my entire family to Australia for us as second generations over here to have such a wonderful life. And she always says, I might not have a degree like you, but I have, societal university. And I think that's just so wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, a piece of paper doesn't count that much. It's what you do with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I used to teach students and I did a degree, and I can do the same degree with my peers, and we have completely different outcomes out of it. So
when I got my degree in my hand on the night of graduation, I walked down off the dais, and one of my senior lecturers was there, and he said, "So what are you going to do now, Richard?" I said, "I'm going to go out and prove that your theory doesn't work in practice."
I love that.
Because, it's all textbook stuff.
Yeah.
It's all taught out of textbooks. And you get in the real world. I'll give you an economic example. You heard of the, I can't think of the name of the guy. It's called the J curve in economics.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when unemployment is high, cost of living is low.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's supposed to travel around that J.
Is that tech? Yep. It's the I know what you're talking about. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
When they were teaching that to us, we had high indexation and high unemployment. They just blew that whole theory out of the window. But all your Keynesians and all these top economic people still believed in the J curve.
Yeah. I mean, it could be true to a certain extent, but our world changes, our life changes, our situation changes as well. Not long ago, pandemics were, to a couple of countries, and now it's our entire world because, we can bring things everywhere. So situations change. Richard, you said you're an avid reader. I love an avid reader. What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading, it's just a crime mystery thing, but I like, I've liked Colleen McCulloch's, I've liked Jeffrey Deaver,
Mm-hmm.
Karen Slaughter, Rob Steins, and I get into some of the more serious stuff, and I cannot remember their names. I have a problem with names, but not the books. I went through a stage of James Patterson.
James, wow, I've not heard that for a while.
So sick and tired of Jack Reacher. It was the same thing every time. It's just he was in a different town. So it just became monotonous. Yeah, I do. I read a book a week.
I love that. So I love reading in general. And I know that I'm not very well if I'm not reading. That's how I know if I'm just scrolling on social media. I have an interesting question that I've been thrown with recently, and I want to ask you and what your thoughts are, is why is it that if you are in the vein of a constant state of fixing yourself, that it sends a message of urgency to your nervous systems and keep you in survival
mode? I can understand that. That's really into the biological, isn't it? Again, I think it's how you deal with the challenges that you've got. It's like they believed the Vietnam veterans, their PTS came from the fact that we were on a 24-hour high of adrenaline. We didn't know there was no place up there that we believed we were safe. So the adrenaline was rushing all the time. You're alert, super alert. And that hasn't left me. And they say that's what caused the chemical change to the brain, which causes the anxiety and everything else that comes with it. I wanted to know if it was a chemical change in the body, why can't we change it back? But apparently our system doesn't do that.
Yeah, that's what I always thought as well, because I'm hypervigilant and I'm always in a state of survival. And in the last probably 10 years, I've been trying to change that, and I'm getting to a point where, you know, I'm not as much. But I always wonder if I can actually really be in a state of calm, if ever, because of my whatever biological clock, or my hormones or whatever.
Hug your husband more.
I hug him a bit. Yeah, I mean, I do hug him a bit. Yeah, he laughs nowadays because I do ask for hugs, and he's like, wow, what's happening to my wife?
The types of questions I want to ask all the different nationalities, you know, how do you get that nice feeling?
Well, I get it by calling him hubby and him calling me wifey. So in Chinese culture, we never really call our spouses or our relatives really by.
Excuse me.
That's okay. Yeah, so in my culture, we don't call people by names, especially our relatives. And we call basically everyone's an auntie, uncle, grandma, or grandpa, but there's different aunties, different uncles to know which one they are, whether it's your mum's bigger sister or your mum's younger brother or anything like that. And if you get called by your full name in Chinese, you know you're going to get a whooping. So when my partner and I started being together, we'd call him Nando, but then eventually I kind of transitioned him so he knows that, like, now he's kind of in my culture. He's half Chinese, but he hasn't really had much to do with the Chinese culture because he's been in Peru. So I guess that's how I get love, is that he calls me wifey and I call him hubby. But if I call him Fernando, which is his full name, by the way, or if I call him Nando, he knows he's in a bit of trouble. If I say Fernando Chu Gonzalez, totally blowing his name out in the public, like, he knows he's in, you know, a bit of trouble. Is that the same with Karen?
Yeah. She rarely calls me Richard. If she does, I've got to stop and listen.
Turn your listening ears on. That's what I say. He goes, I've got my listening ears on. Well, Richard, you know, I just was, do you have any more questions for me?
Not at the moment. No, I was just concerned about your lack of your feelings of not belonging.
Thank you so much for that. That's something that I have been working on for many years. And it's not often that I ever talked about it until probably this year. So it's a process.
Basic need, if you go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes, belonging. And one of the interesting things that I talked to my psychologist about is that maybe a question for me is whether or not I'll ever feel like I belong, because I'm someone who always looks at me not being belonging, or I tend to isolate myself, and the reasons behind why I isolate myself instead of seeing the similarities, and really the underlying theme of it is that that's how I protect myself.
Start a new country called Zoe.
Yes, there's one of the Toastmasters I've been to, we talked about someone who goes, it's called a micronation. You can create a, you know, I'll call it Zoe land or something like that. But no, I think as much as I feel like I love my me time and I'm an introvert more than anything, I thoroughly and genuinely enjoy my time, especially within the network.
There's a new word or new phrase that describes you and me and quite a few others on Finding North, and that is we are an extroverted introvert.
Yeah, yeah. Extroverted introvert is what I've been called. I've been called ambivert a lot. And I think it's because the terms have been really used in different things. So I'm an introvert in a sense that I think before I speak and everything goes in. That's how I also re-energize myself as time alone. But there's a part of me that's an extrovert that still needs that social aspect and connect with people, and I also get energy like that, but I don't get energy from parties. I get energy from conversations like this with you, or with a couple of people in a coffee, having coffee, and things like that. And so yeah, extroverted, introverted, it's plenty of us, I think. Yes. So I love that. I love that. Well, Richard, thank you so much for your time as always. And we're going to have more of these down the track. And we'll continue having these conversations, recorded, unrecorded. I guess why we do this for the network who's watching is that it's just real conversations that we have. And it's no small talk right here.
To let you know too, the first video of the stories that I'm doing is Chelsea in Canada.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I can't wait.
Yeah, she's agreed to do the first one.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, get me to do it when you need me.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much for watching, everyone.